a 33-year-old office worker. My husband, Tony, is 5 years older, and we've been married for 7 years. Partly due to certain circumstances. I live with my mother. Please ask me how I ended up in this situation. Going back 2 years, Tony and I built a house. At the time, Tony had just switched jobs, and we didn't have much in the way of savings or income. Tony's previous job was at a major corporation. However, he suffered some insidious harassment from his boss, leading to sleepless nights, and a few months later, he became unable to go to work. He consulted a psychiatrist and took a leave of absence for about 3 months. But with no signs of recovery, he ultimately resigned. After that, we managed to live on my salary alone. Tony, unemployed for 2 months, began to regain his energy. He started eating well and sleeping again, and his psychiatrist was happy about his speedy recovery. My positive, beloved Tony was back. From there, he vigorously searched for a job. His experience at a major corporation was an advantage, but due to his reason for resignation being mental health, finding a new job wasn't easy. During this time, we found a small company that needed him. His salary was about 2/3 of what he used to earn, but seeing his eyes shine as he said, "It's way better than being jobless, let's do this," it made me happy. Moreover, it was in the field that he wanted. We wanted to have children, but it was clear that life would become difficult if I stopped working. Accidentals result, and because I also loved my job, we gave up on having children. At the time, we didn't think about building a house as it was just the two of us. However, a cloud overshadowed our peaceful life. My mother, Karen, became paralyzed due to a traffic accident and had to live in a wheelchair. Since my father passed away when I was in middle school, Karen had been living alone. Our family home was an old house. It was far from being wheelchair-friendly, with many steps. Tony then suggested, "I'm worried, let's live together." Karen and I were surprised, but I love this kind of unexpected kindness from Tony. Tony had just changed jobs, so we didn't know what would happen, but we decided to apply for a mortgage. As expected, it was difficult to get a loan due to the short length of his current employment. We persisted, trying out a 5th mortgage company. It was indeed difficult to get Tony's loan approved, but the loan officer proposed various options to us. We took a chance on one of these proposals, and it led to a successful loan approval. We finally decided to buy our own home. I had always dreamt of living in a house filled with the scent of wood. Thick, exposed wooden beams on the ceiling, customized storage spaces designed just for us, a kitchen adjusted to my short stature, and a spacious flooring made of cypress. Of course, it is a barrier-free single-story house. The house is perfect for comfortable living in a wheelchair. We couldn't wait for it to be completed, and made a daily routine of visiting the construction site. Then our painstakingly designed dream home was finished. It has a large yard where my mother, who had become reluctant to go out, can now enjoy sunbathing. However, there was one dissatisfaction. The land on which we built was given to us by Tony's grandfather. Tony's family wasn't particularly rich, but his grandfather adored him. But then, Tony's grandfather was suddenly diagnosed with cancer. Upon learning of his illness, he began to distribute his assets. Tony received the largest plot of land. As per his grandfather's wishes, it felt like winning the lottery, but there was a major catch. The land was just a 5-minute walk from Tony's family home. When we told them that my mother would be moving in with us, Tony's sister laughed and said, "Why is your mother moving in too? How shameless is your family? I knew marrying a strange woman like you would cause trouble." Tony's mother also snidely remarked, "Isn't it awful for my son to be dragged into caring for the elderly? Aren't you some kind of curse?" But then during these times, Tony defended my mother and me, saying, "It's the land that Grandpa gave me. There's no reason for anyone to complain." Tony's mother and sister are quite malicious, almost world-class. I think it's a miracle that such a kind person like Tony was raised in that family. Thanks to me, he's like a beautiful lotus flower blooming out of the mud. Tony always said about his family, "I have 2 great examples of what not to be at home." But I'm sure the reason Tony's grandfather gave us this land was probably because he wanted us to look after his mother in her old age. He also had other properties and gave Tony's sister a parking lot located 10 minutes walk from their family home. In terms of size, it's about 2/3 of the land that Tony received. However, it already has a full parking contract, so the monthly parking lot income is significant. Thankfully, I would have preferred that. But you can't complain about a gift. It is something to be grateful for. In reality, thanks to my Gil, we were able to build a house. Having no cost for the land and being able to use it as collateral for a loan made a big difference. Once the house was completed, we invited my meal and Syl's family. However, during construction, we heard from the builders that they had come to see the house several times without our permission. They arrived an hour and a half later than the agreed time without any apology. But in our intrusion, this is kind of like Grandpa's house too, so it's kind of like our house as well. Oh, such a nice house. The smell of wood is nice. Don't need air fresheners. Even though her shoes were muddy because of the rain, she didn't mind at all and went straight into our newly built house. Her husband also walked around in muddy shoes, ignoring the slippers we had prepared. When I urged, "We have slippers available if you'd like to wear them," my Syl laughed and replied, "It's such a hassle, you can just wipe the floor." From the get-go, the atmosphere was terrible. And of course, they came empty-handed. After touring the rooms, they reached my mother's room. My mother's room is the most spacious and has the best sunlight. At my mother's request, we designed it like a duplex complete with a kitchen. It's a room like a second living area. Seeing this, my mom said, "I'm fine with this room. I want to live here." It's an absurd thing to say. Furthermore, my mail told my mother, "You were fortunate to have that accident, weren't you? Thanks to being paraplegic, you've moved from that old shack to such a nice house. Isn't it a turn of fortune?" My mother said nothing, but she looked so sad. Because inside, I was boiling over with anger.
But before I could respond, Tony spoke up. "What did you just say? There's things you can and can't say to people. It makes me question your humanity. I don't even want to think that you're part of my family. You're the worst. Apologize now," Tony said in a strong tone.
Whether they found this amusing or not, my Mayo Syl glared at me. Then my Syl confronted Tony with a heated look. What's this all about? That's a total turnoff. It's not cool to invite people and then treat them like that. Just because you built a house doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. The Mayo joined in too. Anyway, my son went off the rails because he ended up with a wife like you. You're jinx. Tony didn't stay silent either.
Enough is enough. This mess started because of your rude remarks. You were saying that the accident was a good thing and calling my wife a jinx. I won't forgive you for that.
The mother-in-law and sister-in-law looked frustrated by Tony's strong rebuttal. Then my mother, who had been watching the whole scene, apologized with a regretful look.
It's okay. I'm living together with them because I actually had an accident. And it's true that I was able to live in this beautiful house from a rundown one. Your son has always been kind to me. Thank you.
Perhaps feeling guilty, the mother-in-law and sister-in-law left, shooting me a nasty look. My mother then apologized to Tony.
I'm sorry. I must have upset your mother and sister. I'm sorry, I ruined the mood on the day of the housewarming party because of me.
Huck, I should be the one apologizing. It's embarrassing. They really lack decency. I'm really sorry, but I'm happy to be living with you. Please understand that.
With that, my mother started to tear up. Since it's near Tony's parents' house, the neighbors are all people we know. They've all known Tony since he was a child, so they're very kind to us. 4 months have passed since that mess, when we were finally getting used to our new home, and my mother started to smile more. An incident occurred. I received a call from home while I was at work. We rarely get calls from home, so it startled me. But that feeling came true. My mother, unable to hide her agitation, called me. It's awful. Tony collapsed at work. I, too, was agitated by this serious tone. I immediately consulted with my boss and headed to the hospital. Just on the way, I tried to remain calm by unconsciously imagining positive scenarios like, when I get to the hospital, he'll be all right, and joking around to keep me in good spirits. But when I arrived at the hospital, I couldn't believe my eyes. My husband, who was supposed to have gone to work cheerfully after eating breakfast as usual. We were supposed to have a movie date this weekend, but now what I see is him with countless tubes connected to his body. I was completely lost. The doctor said he's in a very dangerous condition. Even if he survives, we don't know if he will regain consciousness. I felt as if I was in a movie. I couldn't even cry. I prayed fervently, yet my prayers went unanswered. My husband, Tony, passed away just like that. In my state of shock, my mother and sister-in-law showed up, as expected.
When they heard that Tony had passed away, my sister-in-law aggressively asked, "Did you poison him or something? Were you after his life insurance money?"
Following suit, my mother-in-law cornered me too. Bad things always happen when you're around, just like your mother. You really are a jinx.
I was so sad I couldn't speak. Just then, my mother arrived in a caregiver's taxi. She was crying at the circumstances of Tony's death. Seeing my mother's tears, I was finally able to cry as well. As the two of us sobbed loudly, my mother-in-law said, "Oh, stop it! Can't you quit the fake crying?"
Now that my son is gone, I don't want to see your faces ever again. Don't appear before us again. And then she left the hospital.
From there, we had a funeral director come in and arrange the schedule for the funeral. We headed to the funeral home. Tony's cause of death was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. I can't believe it. He was fine until morning.
When I informed my mother-in-law about the funeral schedule, she replied unexpectedly. "He's always sided with you two, so I won't attend the funeral. My daughter won't come either."
Many people from Tony's company and his friends attended the viewing. However, neither my mother-in-law nor my sister-in-law and her husband were present. It's unbelievable, but maybe that's just the kind of people they were. Many people attended the funeral too, and I could tell that Tony was loved by many. There were many who shed tears for his untimely death. I was glad to spend the whole day with them, who sincerely missed my husband. I had received an email from my mother-in-law after Tony's death, but its content was inappropriate, so I didn't reply. The email was asking about the amount of life insurance money. She kept emailing because I hadn't replied, and eventually said, "I have a right to receive it." I wasn't in a position to deal with it, so I ignored it. When we arrived at our house, I saw a light seeping out of the room. My mother, Erin, looked puzzled and said, "That's strange. I thought we turned off all the lights. Maybe I forgot to turn it off because I was too agitated." I replied, "That's all right. It's only natural to be upset given the situation," and unlocked the door to our house. Sure enough, we could hear the sound of the TV coming from inside. Definitely weird. My mom and I exchanged glances, then fearfully entered the room. There, sitting in the room, were my sister-in-law and her husband. I was so surprised that I couldn't even raise my voice. The living room was filled with unfamiliar furniture and boxes. We had absolutely no clue what was happening. My sister-in-law then said, "Why did you barge in here?" "Well, it's your first time, so I'll let you off the hook. We're taking this house. We sold your stuff, so leave." My mother and I were utterly stunned. We had no idea what was going on. When I asked, "Where did our stuff and furniture go?" she nonchalantly replied, "We had a resale company come today and they took everything. He had some pretty good furniture. We got a good price for it. We bought this furniture with that money. Who wants furniture that a dead person used?" It's bad luck, isn't it? I'm the type to care about such things. Your stuff is packed in these boxes. I know if you're minimalists or just poor, but it was a relief that you had so few things. The furniture was carefully chosen by my husband. I absolutely couldn't forgive them. My mom was also furious, her face turning beet red, but she was too shocked to reply. I immediately called the resale company. After explaining the situation, they agreed to treat the items as stolen and return them. Honestly, now that my husband is gone, I want nothing to do with his family, but I do feel a desire to stay in the house filled with memories of him. As I was struggling with these feelings, my mother said to me in a voice only I could hear, "What do you think Tony would say if you were here now?" Maybe he'd say we should leave. I'm sure that's true. Tony always used to say, "It's worth spending time with people who understand you, but there are also people who just won't get it." No matter how much you explain, it's a waste of time dealing with those low-level aliens. He was in fact talking about his mother and sister. I can see it clearly now. If we continue to live here, his family and relatives will keep interfering. I impulsively signed a lease on an accessible apartment. My mother was taken aback by my decisiveness. I asked the resale company to keep the furniture for a few days, and it was moved to the new apartment 3 days later. Just in exchange for moving out, I made the mother and sister-in-law promise to cut ties with us. And so a new life began with just my mother and me in the apartment. It seems that Tony had so many life insurance policies. It was almost obsessive. Tony often joked, always with a smile, as when I die, you guys will be rich. True to his word, my husband left my mother and me enough money to be comfortable for the rest of our lives. He was unable to secure a mortgage when we bought the house, so being an employee at a major corporation, I purchased the house under my name. Under my name. I ensured that, even if something happened to Tony first, I certainly wasn't stupid enough to continue paying a mortgage for a house I wouldn't live in. Getting under the original contract, the house would be auctioned off if the mortgage wasn't paid for 3 months. Just in the hustle and bustle of life, 3 months passed in a flash. Then, lead to the commerce, I received a barrage of calls from my sister-in-law, Jessica, with astounding fury. My call history was filled with Jessica and my mother-in-law, Linda. What the heck? This is seriously scary. It sounds like something out of a horror movie. I thought it was a little horror movie. Since they were being incredibly persistent, I picked up the phone only to find out they were furious that the house was being sold. Apparently, when they returned home, they were unable to get in, and there was a seizure notice. Jessica and her husband moved out of the apartment they had been living in since Tony passed away, and Jessica had also quit her job. I suggested they move back into their parents' house since they were panicking about suddenly being homeless. To my surprise, Linda had become so involved in gambling that she couldn't keep up and had sold her own house. It seems they had been living together for the past 2 months. From what I hear, they even sold their primary source of income, a parking lot in front of the train station, a long time ago. Now, Linda and Jessica's family are completely homeless. When Linda said, "I'm sorry for everything. Let's get along. Can you lend me some money, please?" I replied, "I think it's best if you stay away since I'm a jinx. We're strangers now that we've severed ties." Linda fell silent after mumbling a weak "oh." It's in my mind. I was laughing, thinking, who's the real bad luck charm here? Then, when I said, "I won't lend you a single cent," Jessica, who had been listening to the conversation next to Linda, shouted, "You devil! Bring us the money right now." I'm a devil in bad luck, so I'm gonna hang up now. I replied and ended the call. In truth, I had a lawyer involved for the past 3 months, pushing for the auction of the house. I thought it was an unusual case, but apparently it's not that uncommon. The house was sold without any major trouble, allowing our family a moment of respite. We plan to find a new home with the money Tony left us. Given it's just my mother and I, we don't need a big house. We'd rather prioritize security as 2 women living together. And so, I chose a condominium with minimal noise disturbance. I remember something my husband always said when we built our home. People can get everything they want. People can get energy from the sun. So let's create a place where the mother-in-law can enjoy her hobby of reading in the garden without feeling self-conscious. With those words, he had made a spacious courtyard for her. So, I looked for a condo with a large balcony where she could enjoy her coffee and read. It's smaller than our previous home, but the room is spacious enough to house the furniture my husband proudly chose. The piece of land that was gifted to us by Tony's grandfather was expansive, and the house sold for more than expected. With that money, I bought a rather luxurious condominium. The security is top-notch, so my worrywart husband would surely rest easy. And I heard rumors about my in-laws' family. Our old neighbors were worried about my sister-in-law's family suddenly moving in. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family were left homeless. They even tried to borrow money from neighbors. In the end, they couldn't borrow anything and ended up living in public housing after consulting with the community. But they're stubborn people, so it seems the trouble never ends. From what I've heard, they caused a commotion by having a barbecue on their small balcony. Their thoughtless actions must have shocked the locals. And whether it's due to a lack of money or just frustration, they seem to have loud arguments every night. People are saying they're causing such a racket that it sounds like things are being thrown around. My sister-in-law's husband left a long time ago, and now it's just her and Linda living together. It's quite the contrast to my peaceful life with my mother, although we're both 2-member households. It seems that the neighbors are banding together to try to get this nuisance family evicted. No matter where you go, if you're a nuisance, people won't welcome you. What goes around comes around. I just want to live peacefully and quietly, estranged from my embarrassing family. I believe that Tony is surely watching over us. From now on, I plan to live my life without causing trouble to others and do my best to live not just for myself, but for Tony as well. My name is Sharon. I'm a 35-year-old housewife. My husband, Dot Taylor, is the same age, and we've been married for 5 years. We both used to work, but I quit my job when I gave birth to our first child. We did receive unemployment benefits, but they weren't enough to cover our living expenses, and we had to use our savings. Taylor found a job after a while, but his salary isn't enough to maintain a previous standard of living, and we're barely managing to get by. I've been wanting to get back to work, but I've been struggling to find a job. Which during interviews, they always express concern about me not having a backup childcare plan in case of emergencies. Since my parents live out of state, I also can't work while my children are still in their gradual entry period at daycare. That's also been another problem. The local city hall told me that I could get my kids into daycare even while job hunting. But once I tried, it turned out that getting daycare slots for kids, under 3 was far harder than I had expected. For one, priority is given to people who are already working, so as someone who isn't working, I couldn't even get into the first round of applications in August. By the time I was finally eligible to apply in the second round, the classes for my daughter's age group were already full. In the end, no slots were left, and I still haven't managed to secure daycare. Our oldest child, Gary, started attending kindergarten this year. I was told that he could join the class for 3-year-olds without needing approval from the city hall. Our younger child is a girl, and she'll start kindergarten next year. Until then, I plan to work part-time. One day, Taylor, who is at work, texted me, saying I'm stopping by my parents' house. Taylor's father had passed away early, and his older sister, Betty, had left home after she got married. So now, his mother and his younger sister, Tina, are the only ones back home. Occasionally, they do ask Taylor for help with labor-intensive work, like moving furniture around for redecorating or helping carry heavy stuff from the home improvement store. I assumed that they needed his help again that day. However, Taylor, who usually comes home by 8 p.m. even when he stops by his parents' house after work, didn't come home as early that day.
Daddy's late today. He's promised to play Lego with me today. Play or have a balls.
Yeah, got Gary. Why don't we all play Lego together, including your little sister, Mina? So I took care of the kids by myself while waiting for Taylor to come home. Taylor finally came home after the kids were fast asleep. When I heard the front door unlock and went to greet him, I saw Betty and Tina with him, both carrying large luggages.
Bonsaisi, Alcabasu, Astigaren Orskin. We're going to stay here for a while. Goings?
Hey Taylor, where should we put away our stuff?
My sister-in-law, Betty and Tina, nonchalantly asked. I was taken aback but couldn't turn them away at such a late hour. For now, I let them into our living room. As soon as they set their stuff down with a thud, they sank into the couch, started watching TV and playing with their phones. They were chilling in my living room like it was their own place. I gently nudged my husband Taylor's back, pushing him to another room to figure out what was happening. Fine. You didn't tell me Betty and Tina were staying over.
Sorry. It all happened so suddenly.
Don't just apologize, and I need an explanation of what's going on. Don't just apologize. I need an explanation of what's going on.
It's a long story, but it seems Betty had a fight with her husband and went back home, which got her mother mad. Tina tried to mediate, but that only made my mother angrier, and they both got kicked out.
I could kind of picture what had happened. My mother-in-law was always stressing about Tina being jobless, so this incident was probably her last straw. So this is all because of Betty's quarrel with her husband and your mother's fight with your sisters. That's once things cool down. About that, I decided to let Betty and Tina move in with us. They'll be living with us from today. What? You can't just do that without talking to me about it first. We're barely getting by with the 4 of us to begin with. How are we supposed to provide for 2 more people? We don't have the money or the room for it. I know, but I can't just leave Betty and Tina with nowhere to go. We can clear up the kids' room, and we'll figure out the money situation somehow, okay? Please. And that's how we ended up living with my sister-in-law. They never seemed to be looking for a job and didn't help with housework or look after the kids. My workload at home increased, and I constantly had to be mindful of their presence. I was stressed out. Betty was always out and about. Often she'd return in a bad mood, but occasionally she'd bring back some goodies.
Okay, contestry, classroom. But I'm in a good mood today, so I got you this.
Wow, partner, iron. I always wanted this lightsaber. I always wanted this lightsaber. Thank you. White flash nest. Pat Betty, Thunder's catchers, and Pat.
My son was delighted, but I was conflicted. Betty, I'm sorry. We only give toys as presents from Santa Claus on Christmas and on birthdays. We can't accept expensive gifts.
That's a big deal. I wasn't playing fruits. I get Shaba. I'm in a good mood and want you all to feel the same. He's such a bummer. She's pretty smash for.
From what I learned from Taylor, Betty spends most of her time at slot parlors. Her gambling was the reason for her fights with her husband, and by extension, my mother-in-law. Perhaps because of Betty's influence, she'd give toys and candies on a whim or lash out when she was in a bad mood. My son seemed to be becoming more selfish. I was worried that Betty was negatively influencing my son and daughter. On the other hand, Tina, who's unemployed, claims to be an aspiring YouTuber. Tina, my other sister-in-law, is always loud, singing and dancing without being mindful of our neighbors. Hey Tina, this isn't like your mom's house where you lived before. We're living in an apartment. Can you please stop with all the noise?
What? Did someone complain?
Not yet, but we might get complaints any day now. We need to be considerate of others here.
Why should I stop when no one is complaining? I'm an aspiring artist, so I need to practice and stream.
Gary and Mina's crying is much more annoying. You should do something about that instead of coming for me. No matter how much I warn her, she never listens. Soon, we started receiving complaints from neighbors like, please stop blasting loud music, please don't sing at night. And we understand the kids making noise, but we'd like adults to keep it quiet. Tina was being loud today as well. I knocked on her door, but she didn't respond. Being left with no choice, I opened the door. Lena, I've told you already to stop making noise. I've got complaints from our neighbors now. Then Tina glared at me.
How dare you interrupt me while I'm streaming?
But Tina,
Don't call my name. Just leave.
my daughter Mina, startled by Tina's yelling, started crying.
Timmy, you guys are the loud ones here. Please make her shut up.
All I could do was try to calm down my sobbing daughter. Even though I'm the one who has to apologize for the complaints, Tina neither improves her behavior nor shows any signs of remorse, leaving me at my wit's end. When Mina finally fell asleep from crying, the intercom rang. I opened the door, dreading another complaint, but this time it was a mailman. The package, which seemed to be from an online shop I've never heard of, was for Tina, although I couldn't open it. I was curious about what she had bought. It turned out to be from some expensive brand. The feminine dress Tina often wears seems to be from the same brand. Well, I'm unable to afford much for myself. I felt sick to find out that my jobless sister-in-law was spending a fortune on clothes. If my sister-in-law continued to splurge like this, there's no way we can make ends meet. Since my husband, Taylor, is the one giving the money. Don't you think Betty and Tina are spending too much? Gambling and buying expensive dresses, where's all this money coming from? They're not borrowing from sketchy places like loan sharks, are they?
Don't worry, don't worry. They're not borrowing money from such places, and I can handle our finances. Just stop worrying.
Taylor insisted everything was okay and seemed to be arranging money from somewhere. To be honest, I was hoping that my sister-in-law would go back to their parents' home soon, but I wasn't during the situation for now. And so one day, about a month after I started living with my sister-in-law, I got a text from a friend from high school that she had a baby, and I decided to gift her some money from my personal savings. Before we got married, I lived at my parents' home and was able to save up about $4 millionly, including my bonuses, which I had originally intended to use for my wedding. However, my mother told me, don't use the money you saved before you got married. It's important to have some in case for an emergency. It's important to have some in case of an emergency, so I left it untouched. Although I was saving it for building our own house in the future. I wanted to spend some money for my friend's celebration. Even though we were financially struggling, I couldn't just not gift her anything, so I decided to withdraw a little amount from my savings. But I just couldn't find my debit card, which I thought I had kept safe with me. For a moment, I thought it might have been stolen, but my passbook and seal are still here, so it didn't seem like a thief had run through our plates. I thought I must have misplaced it myself, so I decided to search for my debit card later. And in the meantime, go to the nearest ATM and withdraw some money using my passbook. When you make a passbook withdrawal, it automatically records it. But the passbook didn't come out for a while, and it kept printing something. As the machine noise went on and on, I started to get a bad feeling. Finally, the recording finished, and as I suspected, my balance had decreased, and there was only about half of the original amount left. When I checked the withdrawal history, I could see that the money had been withdrawn several times after my sister-in-law arrived. Seeing that, I was sure it was my husband Taylor's doing. Since the money was originally intended for our wedding fund, of course Taylor knew about my savings. I had the same PIN for all my bank accounts, and there was a time when I told Taylor the PIN so that he could withdraw some money from a different bank account shortly after I gave birth to my child. I guess he must have remembered the PIN I told him then. I reached my limit when I found out that Taylor was covering the living expenses of my sister-in-law with my savings, and decided to consult a lawyer. The lawyer told me it's hard to take legal action because theft among relatives is exempted. However, all savings before marriage are personal assets, so you can recover the depleted savings separately from the property division and alimony when you get divorced. He said the bank could suspend my debit card, so I called them and they were very helpful and immediately put a stop to it. I told my parents about this, that I couldn't go on with Taylor, and that I was firm in my decision to divorce. My parents seemed incredulous about what Taylor and his sisters had done. Even so, they said, if you're going to get divorced and come back, we'll always welcome you, which I found very reassuring. Next, I called Taylor's family. I'm having trouble because Tina and Betty came to my house, and with Taylor, they're doing whatever they like. I'm getting complaints from the neighbors about Tina's band practice, and it's poorly affecting my children as well. Even though we're financially struggling, Taylor is giving money to Betty and Tina, and I found out that they were using my personal savings from before I got married. Hearing my words, Taylor's mother sighed deeply.
After not hearing from them for a while, I thought they were doing well only to hear this. They're truly a hopeless bunch. It's my fault for raising them this way. I'm really sorry about all this. You can kick those 3 out right away, and I'll make sure they repay you for the money they've taken.
No, it's not your fault. Finally, I'll get the money back from Taylor himself.
I understand. However, can I tell Betty's husband about this? Apparently, they had an argument over Betty's gambling habit, which is why she moved back in with me. And now her husband keeps contacting me.
Agreeing to my suggestion, she informed Betty's husband about her whereabouts and the situation. Betty's husband then wanted to hear the story directly from me, so we arranged a phone call during his break.
I'm really sorry for the trouble my wife has caused you. I don't know how to apologize.
At the beginning of the call, Betty's husband apologized to me. According to him, Betty had started going to the casino with her friends and got hooked after winning big with her beginner's luck. At first, he had hoped she would lose interest and quit, but instead, she began to dip into their living expenses when she ran out of her own savings. This led to a fight, and she returned to her parents' home. And now he found out that she had also taken my money. He was utterly disappointed in my seal. Thus, both my Mael and Betty's husband came to support me. It would have been best if they were present during the discussion, but since I had already blocked my debit card, it was only a matter of time before my husband found out. As a result, I decided to have a talk with him that night. After the children went to bed, I approached my husband, who was watching TV in the living room. I need to talk to you. Hey, what's up now? Is it about my sisters again? Instead of answering, I put the bank book of my savings from before marriage on the table. I was going to send a gift to my friend, but I noticed that my debit card is missing. Do you know anything about it? Are you accusing me of stealing your card? As he said this, my husband had a guilty look on his face. Seeing this, I was certain that he was the culprit. Take a look. The amount of my savings has been decreasing since the day you brought Betty and Tina here. It looks like you guys used it. What's going on? You're the one who took them in without consulting me, right? Didn't you say you'll cover their expense on your own? In response, my husband snapped back. Hey, it's just borrowing some money from our joint account, right? We're a family, so we're supposed to help each other out. I'm disappointed you're so heartless. If you want to argue, let's get a divorce. I've been waiting for you to say that. Come. It might not be a crime to steal money within a family or a married couple, but it's a different story if we're getting a divorce. The money you guys spend is from my personal savings account, not from our joint account.
Since we're getting a divorce, I'll have you pay back the amount you guys spent.
What? Wait, you're joking, right? Calm down.
I won't wait. You bringing up divorce just to have things go your way. That's called emotional abuse. We're getting divorced, and I'm also going to demand compensation for all of your abusive behavior so far.
My husband argued, but the next day, I packed my belongings and returned my parents home. Shook worlds. I proceeded to handle the divorce through my attorney. My husband ended up burdened with substantial debts due to division of assets, compensation for emotional abuse, and repayment of spent savings. On top of this, he has to pay child support until our 2 children turn 18. His sister, Betty, also received a divorce notice from her husband, citing her reckless spending. She's being sued for compensation as well. Tina, his younger sister, was sued in a civil court for continuously ignoring complaints from her neighbors. The 3 of them, in desperation, went to their mother pleading, "Mom, please help us. I've never seen such disappointing children. We're severing our ties today. ever show your faces to me again. But, man, hunt off even by their own mother. My ex-husband and his sisters were cornered and at a loss. I returned to my parents' home, and my son transferred to a kindergarten around here. When my mother took care of my daughter, I started working. Just as I was getting used to my new job, my ex-husband, Betty and Tina came to my parents' home, begging for money and asking to let them move in with us. All three of them came together once every 2 or 3 days. Of course, I avoided meeting them in person. They all pleaded over the intercom, "Please keep this between us and don't tell Mom and the others," afraid of getting into another trouble. I recorded the intercom footage and also took videos with my phone. I compiled these video files and sent them to their mother. My former meal, I added a note. "They're still coming after us. I hope you can do something about them." They met from my former meal. I received only an apology and a promise that she would take care of it. She was enraged, so I'm guessing all three of them had a rough time with her coming after them. Also, their betrayal of each other came to light, which would probably lead to their downfall. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. As for me, while I may have my children feeling lonely at times, our living conditions have definitely improved. I can afford my own things, and I'm able to live and enjoy my life now. My children are emotionally more stable than when we lived with my ex-husband and his siblings, so I'm glad I got a divorce. But from now on, I will continue to cherish this peaceful life I have now. She's in touch with spirituality, and her words made him shake. Then my husband ran away.
Aunt Rachel, are you sure about this house?
A few days after getting married and moving into our new place, I invited my beloved niece and her mother, my sister. Then my niece said something that made us uneasy.
Hey now, kids shouldn't be messing with grown-ups.
Scolded by my husband, who tends to get worried really quickly. But there was another reason why he was freaking out. My name is Rachel. I'm a 30-year-old pharmacist. I often look after my niece who lives nearby, and she has grown very attached to me. Every time my sister picks her up, she complains, "I know I'm the one who asked you to look after her, but you spoil her too much." Of course, whenever she drops her off, she warns, "Remember, you can't spoil a child when raising them." But I joke in reply, saying that parenting is a mother's responsibility. That's how things go every day in my life. My sister is a nurse, so she's busy most of the time. She works in a well-paying hospital ward and also works night shifts. On the other hand, as a pharmacist working at a drugstore, I fixed working hours and no night shifts. I'm off on days with no outpatient visits, and I don't have to be called in when the clinic is understaffed. So, I often end up looking after my niece when my sister is busy. It might be because she's aware of her situation, but compared to kids her age, she is very calm and obedient. Girls are said to grow up faster than boys, but for her case, I think her family environment is the main reason. I've been spending time with her to make sure she doesn't feel lonely, but now she has me under her thumb. She's a quiet child who doesn't seek much attention, but she has this one ability that's hard for others to understand. For instance, when I tell her the park was empty today, wasn't it? Time flew by quick. Wanting to take a shortcut home, she would give an eerie response saying, "Rachel, Auntie, we shouldn't go that way. There's a bad thing. Let's take the long way around." And things like this happen often. What bad thing? I've heard that children have heightened senses that allow them to see and hear things we can't feel. But is that for real? To be honest, I don't fully believe it. One day, a regular male customer at the pharmacy asked me out for lunch. When you hear irregular at a pharmacy, you might think he's sick, but that's not necessarily true. This man got injured while working, and he's just getting his treatment, so he's healthy overall. In the beginning, he visited frequently, and we casually chatted. His injury is healing well, and we were talking about him maybe not needing to come anymore, and that's when he asked me out for lunch. After a few lunch dates, he invited me out for dinner, and we had drinks at a rather fancy bar. Then, I started to let my guard down with him, and even shared some personal things about myself. It started to dawn on me that crossing that line into a relationship was just a matter of time, and then he proposed to me very passionately. "I want to get married to you right now. I can't imagine my life without you." Rachel, hearing him say that made me happy. I was overwhelmed by the realization that he needed me in his life, and I found no reason to reject him. So I accepted his proposal as if I was being drawn into it. Then, to my surprise, he picked me up in front of everyone, walking like a child. I found that side of him charming. Furthermore, he suggested, "Let's have a ceremony just for the two of us right now." He mentioned he knew someone in the bridal industry who could host and prioritize our wedding ceremony. While he was delighted, I still wanted to be blessed by our loved ones at our ceremony, so I turned down this suggestion. His disappointed face honestly made my heart ache, but I wanted our union to be blessed by others more than anything else, so I chose to stick with my decision. Even though he looked disappointed, he respected my feelings and withdrew his suggestion quite easily. That's also one thing I liked about him. The very next day, which was the happiest day of my life, I shared the news of our engagement with my older sister before she went to work. Seeing her joy, as if it were her own, made me relieved that I didn't have to rush to have our ceremony then. As I happily recalling yesterday's events, he texted me saying he wanted to see me when we first started dating. I remember him saying that he had a younger sister. However, I was surprised to hear for the first time that his sister was hospitalized at the moment. When I asked why he didn't tell me earlier, he explained that he didn't want me to accept his marriage proposal out of sympathy for him. He also pointed out the possibility of the opposite happening. I assured him that I wouldn't make decisions based on his sister's illness, and him softly responding, I know, made me head over heels for him, but I still pulled myself together to stay in my senses. He showed me a picture of his sister and told me, when I told her about you, Rachel, she said she can't wait for the day when she can call you Big Sis. I wanted to make my sister's wish come true as soon as possible. When he held my hand and said, let's become a family soon, I was yet again moved. But even if we aren't married yet, I wasn't against the idea of being called Big Sis by his younger sister. I wanted to visit his sister, who is in the hospital, before getting married right away. However, when I told him this, he said, after I visited her the other day, her condition worsened and the doctors limited her visitation. Is it okay for you to be seeing me right now in a time like this? I asked. He responded by pulling out a charm from his jacket pocket. All I can do is pray for my sister. He expressed his frustration. Seeing him like this, I deeply wanted to be there to support him. Since the next day, he suddenly stopped contacting me. I guess his sister's condition had gotten worse. I hoped he wasn't pushing himself too much. And then, after about 3 days, his usual cheery self showed up at the pharmacy. Although he could have just texted me, he said he wanted to see me in person. That was enough to make me happy. We made plans to meet after we both got done with work. When I arrived at a rendezvous right on time, he was already there waiting. As I had suspected, he explained that he had been by his sister's bedside due to her deteriorating condition. He told me she was still not allowed to have other visitors, but her condition was now stable, and I breathed a sigh of relief. He then handed me a letter saying it was from his sister. I was surprised. I didn't expect to receive a letter from her, since I heard that she was in critical condition. Reading my expression, he explained, seems like she's been writing a lot, and I didn't even know. He then shyly admitted, actually, I fell for you at first sight, so I had a crush on you for a long time. Turns out he'd been talking about me even before we started dating. The letter contained words of hope for our relationship, dreams of her brother's love being fulfilled. I hope the day comes when I get to call you Big Sisses soon. I wonder if even I can be a flower girl. She was dreaming of me getting married with her brother and us becoming a family. Fighting an illness is hard. It's probably a struggle to even use her limited energy to wish for others' happiness. Yet the letter was filled with the thoughts of her brother getting married to me, which brought tears to my eyes. Let's get married soon. I told him with excitement. It seems very unlikely that his sister will be able to attend our wedding, but I want her to be able to witness her beloved brother's big day. After some insistence, I got him to reveal the name of the hospital she was staying at, and I found a wedding chapel nearby. The chapel was visible to the naked eye from the patient's room or the rooftop, which made it feel like she could be there with us, and he begged to have our ceremony there. He was touched to know that I genuinely cared about his sister. He was fully down with the idea, and we soon fixed a date. Ideally, we wanted to choose one of those days known to be blissful, but we couldn't afford to be picky. The day we fixed for our ceremony happened to be less expensive, and it was the only day available, so we went with it without hesitation. While preparations were hastily underway, he made a suggestion. He asked if we could wait a bit longer to turn in our marriage certificate. His sister's condition had worsened, and she needed to go under surgery as soon as possible. It seemed like the medical bill was going to be more expensive than expected, and it was even affecting our wedding budget. As for me, it didn't feel right to have a wedding under such circumstances either. When I suggested waiting until after his sister's surgery, he exclaimed. If she found out our wedding was cancelled because of her, it would ruin her will to heal. Hearing that, I couldn't say anything and the wedding proceeded as planned. For the time being, I paid for our ceremony in one installment under the agreement that we would split them after his sister's medical bills were paid. Despite the short notice, a decent amount of our close friends and family managed to attend our wedding day. This my own sister, who's a nurse, even managed to get time off with the help of her colleagues, saying this is an important day for my little sister. I can't miss it. My cute little niece was dressed up and joined in too, but because she was not used to being around grown men, she got shy and ended up hiding behind me quickly. Her actions were so adorable that it made me chuckle. After the wedding, I moved into our new home. He had suggested me to move into his place, since his place was too big for him alone. Because we figured that his sister's surgery was going to cost more than we anticipated, we decided to not purchase a newly built home. I could support him for a while, but we couldn't tell when he'll be able to pay back the rest of our expenses. And so, I decided to move into his place. My sister was understanding of my decision, but she still felt that it would be better if we had our own new place. So, I decided to invite my sister and niece over. My boyfriend, he's my husband now, agreed to the idea. Upon visiting, my sister immediately began inspecting our house, showing her concern. Hey, it's a bit rude to check every corner of our houses. So I see, a 32-year-old CEO of an import company makes good money, huh? Are you satisfied now? Yes, I suppose so. My husband and I let out a sigh of relief. The only downside was that, by moving here, it became more difficult to frequently babysit or take care of my niece. It was too far to let a 5-year-old travel alone, and with my duties of nursing my husband's sister, I was too occupied. That's when my niece, out of the blue, said something eerie. Rachel, I think you should leave this house. There, because another woman is already living here. Hey, even if you're a kid, there are things you should and shouldn't say.
Hey, just mind your opposite. Even if you're a kid, there are things you should and shouldn't say.
He angrily turned towards my sister, questioning her parenting.
Can you perhaps see her?
When my niece nods yes, my husband's anger seems to dissipate into fright.
My niece is quite sensitive. Perhaps you're not good with this kind of thing.
No, that's not the issue. I shouldn't be messing with grown-ups.
I'm not messing with you. It's someone you know really well. A woman with her black hair, always tied back. Thin eyes, slightly overweight, with a mole near her eyes.
He's clearly scared, but it seems like there's something more to it. What confirmed my skeptics was my niece's following question.
What's your real name? Brun said. You use so many. Have you forgotten it?
Me trembling, my husband raises his voice.
Elizabeth is more nice. Dan spans means. She's punches actions, crush.
Hey, don't yell at her just because you're scared.
Yeah, that be sure and dance a bishop.
My husband shoved me away. He seems more than just panicked with fear. Even if what my niece says is strange, in the end, it always turns out to be true. My usually gentle husband wouldn't change this drastically without reason. I can't shake the feeling that he's not just reacting out of fear. I whispered to my sister and asked her to check inside my husband's bag. In the meantime, I decided to give up for the time being to get my husband's attention.
I'm sorry, my niece was out of line.
I'm get what you know, so it's okay as long as you get it. On my precious day got ruined because of all this.
He glares at my niece, but she's not bothered. She simply looked away with a stoic expression.
Oh yeah, you have a long business trip starting tomorrow, right?
As I used soothing words to placate my husband, he gradually calmed down. The topic conversation shifted to stuff like what he should bring back for souvenirs. However, we didn't get to discuss the details of the souvenirs. The reason was the name on the driver's license my sister found in his bag, a name I didn't recognize. Furthermore, she found multiple phones in his bag. Rachel, your guy's probably sketchy. Aren't these burner phones?
Burner phones. The kind used in scams and such.
Exactly. Displayed under someone else or even false names.
And what if it is? Thanks to that, the cost tragic. Rachel's been eating well and enjoying fancy dates, hasn't she?
He said it as if I was his partner in crime. Cut the crap. My sister is nothing like a piece of trash like you.
There's a woman clinging to him. like she'll never let him go.
Blink is Teeple Bird. Hush your mouth, kid. If it beats hard, yummy, I'll fall for it again.
It seemed less out of fear and more like he was brazen now that his true identity was starting to be exposed. But the fact that he was not trying to escape showed that he was confident in not getting arrested. Perhaps he was even inwardly laughing, so assured he seemed until the moment his world came crashing down. That moment came when several policemen burst in shouting at police and surrounded him. My sister had already found the driver's license before she told me. She had called the police before telling me, and all our conversations had been overheard by them since. There had already been several complaints filed by different women. The man's description matched those provided. The police were eager to catch him in the act if possible, and the situation was ideal. My sister didn't want to let them escape and wanted to protect me. It was a miraculous arrest, with our interests aligning in an instant. Since we hadn't formalized our marriage, the man I had thought of as my husband was now just a man being firmly taken away, and I could only watch in stunned silence. Later, during the police interrogation, he seemed to resign himself, or perhaps calculated that confessing would lighten his punishment. Without causing any further trouble for the police, he spoke surprisingly honestly. It seemed he intended to commit marriage fraud against me and bleed me dry. That was probably for the medical bills for his non-existent sister. He had also confessed to killing a woman he had previously dated during an argument. The argument had been over his true identity being exposed and a threat to report him to the police. Although he was frightened when my niece spoke up, he didn't seem to fully believe her, so I could understand why he confessed that as well. I learned all this from the police. The night he was taken away, he woke up in the cell, choking with long hairs entwined around his neck. He confessed his wrongdoings, fearing he'd be cursed otherwise. When I asked him, is it true about the hair? He laughed and said, of course not. He insisted he had finger marks around his neck, but apparently he was the only one who could see them. It seems that some people, when they've committed a crime, occasionally can't bear the guilt and resort to escapism. Yet, remembering the image of the woman my niece had described sent chills down my spine. As the investigation proceeded, according to the man's statement, a woman's skeleton was discovered in the woods. It made the news, and when the woman's photo was released, it was just as my niece had described. My sister and I were filled with renewed fear. The man's fraudulent activities were also reported in the news, and more victims started to speak up. It seems like his list of crimes is only going to grow. The man was sentenced to severe punishment behind bars. Inside, he is said to be terrified of the woman's spirit every day. I was simply astounded at my lack of judgment, having once decided to marry such a Mary. The trial for the incident in which I was victimized has ended, and I'm finally free from everything. However, I've had enough of marriage. I moved back near my sister's house, so I am still looking after my niece. But today, while I was dropping off at my sister's house, I opened up to my sister about my hesitations towards marriage and love. She said, "You're just saying that now. You never know where or when you'll meet someone. Like you could fall in love after you leave here today." She doesn't take it seriously. And time passed, and summer came. Every year, it's my job to take my niece to the local summer festival. This year, as I was walking hand in hand with her, who is dressed in her new sundress, a man walking in front of us dropped his wallet. I picked it up and tried to call out to him, but it seemed my voice didn't reach him due to the loud, surrounding noise. I picked up my niece and jogged to catch up to him, returning his lost item. He thanked me and asked to treat us something. This sparked a connection between us. In the end, the three of us had a blast at the fair that day. You're lucky. Rachel, you've been tied to this man before you were even born. What? Hey, what are you saying? Oh my. I blushed deep red at her words, which seemed to make him blush as well. You never know where love will find you. My sister's words flashed in my mind as fireworks lit up the night sky. I have a feeling that a new romance was on the horizon. Do you truly cherish your family? Don't you take them for granted just because they're always there? What I'm about to share is my own real-life experience. I'm Donna Hernandez, 45 years old. I want to share a story from the time in my life when I most profoundly pondered on family dynamics, what a healthy family looks like. This takes us back about 15 years when I was working as a magazine editor. My life was consumed entirely by work. In the field of editing, there's hardly any time for dating. Despite this, everyone tried to make the most of their precious 30s, carving out time for blind dates and other outings. It was a slightly more relaxed era, security-wise too, so meeting up with your date in between work was quite common. However, I wasn't good at making time for myself or for leisure. Work was always my priority, and dating always ended up being pushed back to the bottom of my list. This made me a bad partner. The person who still showed interest in me, despite all this, was my dear understanding husband. Steven. He was an editor at the same company. We worked on different magazines and never really interacted directly. But we both often worked late, so we would see each other pretty often on the same elevator after work. This served as a bridge between us. Both of us were proud of our work and didn't want dating to interfere, so we were quite similar in that regard. Sometimes we'd even passionately discuss the future of magazines as comrades in arms. Because of the decidedly unromantic nature of our relationship, it took us some time to become a couple. Now that we're married, however, there's no one who understands me better than he does. He's my invaluable partner. My husband was the one who suggested we split household chores to ensure we both could continue working effectively. We didn't adopt a rotation system, but rather whoever noticed something that needed doing or whoever was available would do it. This approach left us both stress-free. We were a couple who could talk about anything, and our relationship was almost like a friendship. One day, my husband got a call from his father. His mother had fractured her dominant hand and wanted us to help with household chores until she healed, even if that meant living with them. I was puzzled at this point. My husband's parents lived with his younger brother. There were 2 adults in the house. Surely they wouldn't need us to move in to help. I instinctively asked my husband, do they really need help? My husband was also confused, saying, that's exactly what I said, but they insist they can't manage without help. I can't believe it. Heck, the relationship between my husband and his younger brother was strained, and as a result, my husband kept his distance from his family home. His younger brother had a habit of job hopping and never held down a job for more than a year. He seemed to be unemployed at the moment. He claims he's making money playing slot machines, seeing gambling as a legitimate job, which is just absurd. My husband had once referred him to a job through his connections, but his brother had run off without even notifying his boss, forcing my husband to apologize to them on his behalf. But their father never reprimanded the brother. Whenever their mother tried to scold him, their father would always intervene in a rather overprotective manner. I kept silent about my husband's family matters, but my husband naturally sided with his mother. But in the end, his father and brother's attitudes didn't change. From that point on, my husband became distant from his family, saying, I get irritated when I see my dad and brother. Distance meant he wouldn't visit the house, but he made sure to stay in contact with his mother and father. He seemed to want to cut ties with his father as well, but he couldn't since he was the only one to contact in case anything happened to his mother. Amid this, the CO's call was from his father, not his injured mother. Right now, my husband is involved in the correlation of a new magazine and is an important member of the project. His father didn't work after retirement either, so despite having 2 men at home with plenty of free time, they still needed our help. I guess we have to go, my husband said with a sigh. The magazine was a children's magazine, something my husband had dreamed of for many years. He surely wants to devote all his strength to work. On the other hand, due to a major reorganization in the magazine I was involved in, I was in a situation where I could easily take a substantial break. Those who can, do what they can do. That's our family motto, isn't it? Take good care of this house. When I said this with a smile, my husband reluctantly said, I'll go because I might make you have a hard time with my family issues. But in the end, seeing my eager self, he finally gave in and bowed his head. It's all right. Whatever happens, I'll face it. Dust. I want to help with the housework in my husband's place. Thank you for coming. Donna, I know you're busy with your work. I'm sorry. With her head bowed apologetically, my mother-in-law welcomed me. She had a cast on her hand. Even now, after aging, my mother-in-law was still actively working on the front lines as an insurance saleswoman. Her figure in a cast looked strangely pitiful. For the time being, I asked her about the general things, like what I should do, meal times, etc. That's when it happened. Hey, I'm going to work, so give me some money. The person who came stomping was my brother-in-law, who had grown considerably. He was much larger than the last time I saw him. He was so arrogant that I thought I'd give him an honorary sir. And what does he mean by give me money? Because I'm going to work. He's just going to the casino, isn't he? If he says it's work, how about not taking any money in earnings zone? I don't have money, so you should stay at home. My mother-in-law raises her voice. I thought that's right. That's right. Shut up. Just want me to cause a scene? My brother-in-law said. At this, my mother-in-law shrinks for a moment and goes to get her wallet in silence. She takes out $200 and hands it to her son. My brother-in-law flutters the bills and goes out the front door. Wait, is it okay to give that to him? I was taken aback. Even if that goofball threw a fit, we could easily shun him down, can't we? That's what I thought, but I noticed my mother trembling in fear. Mother-in-law, was it okay to give him the money? When I asked, my mother-in-law looked down and silently nodded. I wasn't satisfied. It made no sense. Just 30 minutes in, I already wanted to tattle to my husband, but I had to resist because he was in the middle of his work. I'm short-tempered. If it were me being asked for money, I'd have lost my temper and lashed out at him. However, since my mother-in-law didn't retort, I decided to keep my mouth shut for the moment. At the same time, I thought I might need to keep a close eye on this household, but that was the only issue, and the day ended. I was wondering, is my brother-in-law the only problem? The next day, I accompanied my mother-in-law to the hospital. We did make an appointment, but it was crowded, so we got home later than planned. My father-in-law was there to welcome us back home. I had expected a warm welcome back, but instead I was scolded immediately. You haven't prepared the bathtub yet, and it was only 3 in the afternoon. Apparently my father-in-law had been sweating and wanted to take a bath right away, and was angry that the bathtub hadn't been cleaned. I almost told him you could clean it yourself, but I decided to hold my tongue for now, seeing that my mother-in-law wasn't saying anything. But then, I see my mother-in-law about to apologize and head for the bathroom. No, you can't be cleaning the bathroom, you're injured. I hurriedly stopped her and took over the cleaning duties. Just when the cleaning was done, I went to check on my mother-in-law. I assumed she would be taking it easy after the hospital visit, but instead, she was already starting her dinner preparations. I offered to help, and my father-in-law laughed and said, "Ha, well, that's great. This will speed things up." He got on my nerves, and I accidentally glared at him. I was worried that I had made a mistake. But it turns out my father-in-law wasn't paying for it. But it turns out my file wasn't paying me any mind, engrossed in the TV on his couch. To top it all off, he casually asked me to give him a shoulder rub later. I couldn't believe he could make such a request. Looking at my mouse-bandaged hand, that night dinner tasted bland, perhaps due to my seething anger. My bill complained about the food being basic, and my Phil demanded my injured meal to serve his drink. I wanted to give them a piece of my mind, but I had to consider my meal's feelings. In just 2 days, I come to understand the lowly position of my meal in this household. I couldn't believe how different things were from the last time I visited this house. Once my Mel and I were alone, "Why don't you ever speak up for yourself?" I couldn't help but ask her. Well, isn't this how it is in every household? Which household? It's certainly not like this in our house. I retorted, and my Maya looked taken aback. According to her, when she had complained about the situation at work, her colleagues had just laughed it off, saying things like, "That's just how it is everywhere." The wife is always working her tail off. She had given up, thinking if that's what everyone else was enduring, then it must be unavoidable. Oh, please, Daimel, just because other families have their own customs doesn't mean it's not strange. And don't normalize what you feel is weird just because it's common elsewhere. Apparently, since her husband retired a year ago, things had taken a turn. At first, it was just tolerable things that you'd expect in any household, like him asking, "Is dinner ready yet?" Even the idea of the husband not doing chores while at home seemed like a fairly universal issue. So she had put up with the mounting stress, thinking it was something unavoidable. But gradually, my Phil's complaints increased. If my Mild didn't prepare his meals on time, or didn't cook what he wanted, he would start complaining. But to make things go his way, he wouldn't hesitate to use dubious arguments like, "The doctor said that simple meals have too much salt, so it's a no-go." Of course, no doctor had ever said anything like that, and he seemed to forget his own argument the next day, asking for more seasoned food. My Mile was tossed around by his whims, getting scolded for making food too salty one day and too bland the next. Naturally, she couldn't keep up with these unreasonable demands. As a result, my father-in-law began to look down on her as a woman who couldn't do chores or cleaning to his standard. Seeing this, her son also started to look down on his mother, joining his father in their criticism, apparently out of resentment from being scolded himself before. Not only did he voice his complaints along with his father, he also began to demand money, sinking to a new low. My mother-in-law couldn't ignore this behavior and scolded him, asserting that what he was doing wasn't right. But then her son, who had been losing money playing slot machines, lashed out at her one day when she tried to give him a talk. As a result, she ended up with an injury above her eyebrow where he had thrown the TV remote at her. It wasn't intentional, more of an accident in the process of trying to get her out of the room. I am sure that if I had been there, I would have at least thrown a chair back at him. But my mother-in-law is not that kind of person. It was enough of an incident to make her take a softer approach towards her son out of fear of things escalating further. Knowing this, her son started to threaten to cause a scene if his whims were not indulged. I couldn't help but think what a terrible person he had become. In the end, despite having 3 adults in the house, the only one doing any work or chores was my mother-in-law. 2 men were leeching off of her, and yet had the audacity to act high and mighty. Mom, if things get too tough, you can always come to our place. Let's stand up and say no to things we can't accept. Upon hearing my words, my mother-in-law looked down with a complicated expression on her face. You're right. It's reassuring to know that this isn't normal. I thought I was just being overly sensitive. After saying that, she smiled and ended the conversation with, "Let's get some sleep for today." I wondered if I had overstepped my boundaries. But I don't think I was wrong. I decided that I would do everything I could to help my mother-in-law if something were to happen. The next morning, it seemed like the weather and the atmospheric pressure were affecting my mother-in-law's health, not just her hands. I had just decided to give her all the support I could to make sure she didn't push herself. Her son came down from upstairs saying, "Mom, take me to the casino." I inadvertently said, "What? Hey, the newspaper isn't here. Hurry up and get it from the mailbox." Even my father-in-law chimed in. He could have gone to the nearby mailbox himself. I shot him a glare, but of course he just stayed seated on the couch. That object moves only when prompted by a physiological phenomenon. I wonder if it's supposed to be some sort of feature of this house. My mother-in-law stayed silent as I trembled with anger. Usually, she would start her work after uttering yeses or some other word of affirmation. Does her silence and lack of motion mean that yesterday's persuasion worked? As I watched anxiously, my father-in-law impatiently said, "Are you done yet?" Even my brother-in-law started saying things like, "We are waiting and ready." Why is silence interpreted as an okay in this house? Gosh, I can't stand this. Just as I reached the end of my tether and was about to lash out on these deadbeat men,
I absolutely won't do it.
it was my mother-in-law who shouted. Both my father-in-law and brother-in-law were surprised, as it was the loudest she's ever yelled.
Just do whatever you want. I'm not fond of your demands anymore.
Well said. I felt an urge to dance with joy. Good for you, mother-in-law. That's amazing. As I was secretly cheering her on, my father-in-law let out a big sigh.
Sorry, push. I'll talk and no work. That's fine. That's fine. I'm gonna leave. Go on, Skirty. Leave. Leave come some like chilies.
Only at times like these does he look at me from his couch with a grin. That's right. You should leave. My brother-in-law was laughing as well.
But you all, leave.
Just as I was about to yell, it was my mother-in-law who calmly agreed to leave.
Well then, I'll go. Let's leave together. Darn it.
I felt a sudden lift in my mood. Mother-in-law, you've made a decision. I answered with an uncontrollable smile. Yes, and immediately called a taxi to leave the house with my mother-in-law. I need to take her home before she changes her mind. Hence, we got home and she got some rest. I called my husband to inform him about all that happened. I actually hadn't told him about the events from the past 2 days yet. I'd been so prepared to dash out at the slightest sign of trouble that I'd forgotten to consult him for support. My husband finished his work super early that day after I explained the situation. Oh my, isn't my husband just too competent? And then the 3 of us thought about what to do next. My awakened mother-in-law was ruthless. Let's make their lives miserable, she declared with a smile. She's usually so gentle, but she's a skilled insurance agent after all. It's just how it is. That's what she made herself believe for so long to put up with their nonsense. I truly sympathize for her. But if she could tolerate such things for a whole year, she must be really strong-willed. I won't go back until they come begging, my mother-in-law loudly declared. The next day, my mother-in-law canceled both of their cell phone plans and drained the bank account where the utility bills were auto-deducted. We thought they might realize something was wrong as soon as their phone stopped working and come begging. But both my mother-in-law and husband disagreed. After all, Neither my father-in-law nor my brother-in-law had ever paid a bill themselves, so they didn't understand how the system worked. But to make matters worse, neither of them worked, so it wasn't like they were expecting calls from anyone. This was still the era of flip phones, and these two didn't use the internet much, so they rarely touched their phones. They probably won't even notice, and will just think they have bad service. My husband and mother-in-law laughed. As for the utilities, my mother-in-law chuckled, saying they don't even know the bills are auto-deducted, so they'll definitely end up having their bills piled up. Who knew these monsters couldn't handle basic household chores, let alone life? On a side note, unfortunately, there seems to be a bit of money left in the house for living expenses. Apparently it's enough to last about 3 months for food, assuming my brother-in-law doesn't spend it all in slot machines. Each month and a half passed since then. Rob, please. You've got Mom there, right? Tell her to pay the bills. We can't survive the summer without Ete. This pitiful call, half sobbing, was from my brother-in-law to my husband. He had to go out and find a payphone because his cell service had been cut. It was summertime. The weather wasn't as scorching as it is these days, but it was clear that their electricity had been cut. Normally, they should have realized something was wrong when they received overdue bills, but just as my mother-in-law had predicted, they hadn't noticed. They woke up in the morning because of the heat and found out that none of the lights were working. When they frantically contacted the power company, they were told they hadn't paid their bills. By the way, my husband received this call and hung up right after hearing what my brother-in-law had to say. My husband can be quite ruthless. That's one of the things I love about him. They tried to call our house too, but we saw the number and didn't pick up. It was my mother-in-law's orders. Another half a month passed. 2 months had passed since the beginning of my mother-in-law's revenge. When I came home from work, my brother-in-law and father-in-law were sobbing in front of our house. Ace, please let us see Mom. The water has been shut off. Donna, I beg you to, the toilet. The toilet won't flush. Hearing them, I struggled to hold back my laughter. They were so desperate. It was ridiculous. I wonder if they were aware of it. Anyway, it was inconvenient having them hang around at our doorstep, so I decided to talk to my mother-in-law about it. She decided to meet them and showed her face in front of the two of them. My husband came home just in time, so we all decided to have a talk inside the house. What are you two deadbeats who don't know anything about the real world doing here? My mother-in-law spoke. The two of them couldn't look at my mother-in-law in the face and were bowing, even though they were sitting at the table. We can't do this anymore, we're sorry. Please come back, my brother-in-law said, hanging his head low. My father-in-law followed suit. I'm also at my wit's end having to look at you two. But I wonder what I should do in that case. My mother-in-law glanced at me with a playful grin. Indeed, what should we do? I wonder, following her lead. I also chimed in with a smile. Why don't you stay here forever, Mom? Then my husband chimed in grinning. Exactly. Going back would just mean babysitting 2 jobless grown men again. I would hate that. The moment my mother-in-law uttered those words, whoa, I'll start working. I'll work, my brother-in-law cried out. But we all noticed the moment his face twisted into a confused wait. Probably, I'll works was just a spur-of-the-moment lie, but this was a golden opportunity. If that's the case, write a pledge right here, and now that you will work your fingers to the bone from now on. My husband quickly prepared paper and a pen, handing them to my brother-in-law, who was completely being swept away by our pace. Here, right here. Write that from now on you will live in Tertequila.
Here, round here. Read that from now on. You will live entirely on your own money and provide for Mom.
His face grew paler by the second.
If you break this, you break this. You'll have to give all your assets to Mom. Got it.
My husband's words carried no legal binding. But there was a strong intimidating force that told you he would make you stick through the agreement no matter what. My brother-in-law replied with a small voice. Understood. And you too, Dad. My mother-in-law said. Don't think I'm going back just because he's working. If you don't change, it won't change the fact that I have a jobless grown child to deal with. I've nothing to do with this. My father-in-law quickly defended. Is that so? Then we'll have you leave that house. Dad, would that be fine? Abby's? Mom, when my husband said that, my mother-in-law chuckled wickedly. That's not enough. What else can we get out of him? Why not sell those fancy watches and stuff that Dad cherishes? Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. The moment my husband and mother-in-law began picking out a list of things to sell, my father-in-law slammed the table and stood up. I got it. I'll do anything. Just please come back. As he finished his words, he hung his head down, defeated. Anything you say? What exactly will you do? At my mother-in-law's words, my father-in-law let out a squeal. He was clearly terrified by the atmosphere and afraid of her. I'll help with the household chores and clean. That's the absolute minimum. Dad, you're living in that house too. It's odd to think of helping out as doing someone else a favor. You're just taking care after yourself. Stand that and stop being cocky. All the housework? Okay. Yes.
Oh, he's unemployed. Even with all the housework, it's not nearly enough.
My husband added, with his eyes turning red, I'll do anything I can. I believe he felt both shame and frustration, feelings likely stemming from being told off by his own son. And so the drama ended with my mother-in-law agreeing to return home on the condition that all her demands were met. He fast forward 10 years. My brother-in-law faced many job rejections, but he managed to land a part-time job at a diner, which he used to talk about when he was a kid. He was surrounded by younger colleagues and went through some rough patches, being worn out by the workload. However, realizing that no other workplaces would hire him due to his long history of unemployment, he continued to work with newfound determination. His hard work paid off, and he was hired as a full-time employee 5 years later. Last year, he even got promoted to the position of store manager, a late bloomer. I guess my mother-in-law, realizing that she couldn't handle the physically demanding job of an insurance saleswoman anymore, has now become a full-time housewife. As per the agreement from that time, my father-in-law does all the housework. He's found joy in it. Recently, he's so engrossed in cooking that he's been serving French cuisine at home. It's delicious, and we often enjoy his culinary treats. There have been changes in our lives too. My husband has been promoted to the editor-in-chief. I know he would make it. His dream of running a successful children's magazine led to an extraordinary fast-track promotion. Now, I'm the wife of an editor-in-chief, but I'm still just an editor. This is because my focus shifted to our kids due to consecutive maternity leaves. I'm now a mom to 3 boys and 1 girl. Every day is a whirlwind, but I found that prioritizing my kids over work brings more joy. Thanks to my mother-in-law and father-in-law occasionally taking care of the kids, it hasn't been too overwhelming despite having a large family. This isn't because we asked them to. They simply help out when they can. Thick in a family, whoever can, does what they can, regardless of gender roles. No one has to sacrifice themselves for everybody. I believe that's the most effortless and natural way to achieve happiness in a family. Each person is not just mommy or dad, but an individual of their own. I plan to continue cherishing my family with all my might. I hope you all also pay close attention to your family, ensuring no one is struggling or sacrificing for others. Because I believe that's the shortcut to long-lasting happiness